My name is Shane Elson. I'm from Australia. I have been involved with community radio since 1992. I started broadcasting on a local community radio station in a regional area of Victoria. I went on to serve on the board of the Australian Community Radio Broadcasting Association in various positions, and I became involved in AMARC Asia-Pacific in 2005 in Jakarta, where the Asia-Pacific region was first put together. So community radio in Australia celebrated its 50th birthday in September this year, which is quite a milestone. Prior to the formalisation of community radio, there were a number of test stations and a couple of pirate stations. So 50 years has seen community radio develop to have a very strong presence in the Australian community. We have a diversity of radio stations. We have generalist stations which will play music, they may have talk shows, and they may have some multilingual broadcasters as well. We also have specialist stations, which again, they may be music based, or they may be language based, where they have a diverse range of migrant community languages represented. We have some religious stations which promote their particular faiths, but usually do so in a very moderate and unimposing way. The sector is recognised as the third peer of radio broadcasting, along with commercial and state broadcasters. So our position is fairly strong, very diverse. There are about 250 stations scattered across the country, and including a number of indigenous stations, which are very strong within their own communities, and for some they have quite a decent following of non-indigenous listenership as well. Community radio in Australia has to be owned by the local community. So when a group forms, then they have to demonstrate to the regulator that they have community participation, that they are not for profit, and that they will put in place policies and procedures which allow for community access. So it's very much those three tiers which underpin community radio, particularly not for profit. So while it's okay for a radio station to seek income, and that might be through membership fees and sponsorship, so going out to commercial businesses and saying, if you sponsor us, we'll produce some announcements for you, that's quite okay. Any surplus or profit that the station makes cannot be given to the members or the directors or anyone else. So it's very much not for profit. As far as community participation goes, again, there are processes in which the regulator goes to local stations and says, show us your books. What is your broadcast schedule? Let's have a look there. Who are you representing? If your community has this kind of population, is that population represented in your broadcasting? So it's not an overwhelming process that community radio broadcasters have to go through, but it is very strict. And that's a really good thing because it has kept the sector honest. The community radio station, when they apply for a licence, that is owned by the members of that community radio station. There are different membership structures, but that's a little bit irrelevant for our discussion. But suffice to say, it's the membership that owns that broadcast licence. In Australia, about 25 years ago, the government and the regulator closed off the broadcasting spectrum. So they basically said, we're full, there's no more opportunity for new community radio stations to come on board. So all the stations that existed at that time, there are a couple that have faded, but they're pretty much all there. And that process was one of, as I said, being able to demonstrate that at that stage, these are the things you're going to do, that you will guarantee that ongoing community participation, community access, that your structure will be not for profit. Since then, the regulator's role has, as I've implied, has been more kind of an oversight to make sure that everyone is abiding by the rules. The way community radio stations do that is through their charter, how they represent their community. So for indigenous community radio stations, their first priority is the indigenous community, which is a minority community within Australia. So their charter will be about promoting the rights of indigenous people by giving them access to the airwaves to be able to produce programming for the older indigenous population, for the younger indigenous population, for indigenous children, for other groups within that community. We have one station which broadcasts, and it was established primarily for the LGBTQI community. So their charter is all about how do we give access to the airwaves from airwaves to the representatives of that community. How do we promote our interests? How do we promote safe sexual health messages, all those kinds of things. For many other stations, for the vast majority of stations who are what we call generalist stations, it's about giving access to the migrant communities so that they can broadcast in their own languages to their communities within that geographical location. It's about producing children's programs. It's about producing programs that cater for the elderly, for people with disabilities. And so that the charter of operation that each station has will be particular to their location, and very much, again, serving their local community in all its diversity. I think that one of the defining differences between the Australian community radio broadcasting scene and what I've seen around the Asia-Pacific region and further afield in other parts of the world where community radio operates, is Australia is a fairly stable and country, and there hasn't been a lot of internal conflict. Our internal conflict has tended to be more subtle rather than violence on the streets, although there has been violence on the streets. That's not the norm. And so for many of our community radio stations, the idea of social justice being the central impetus for what they do is not recognised. And so I think if I was to try and take back a message to community radio in Australia from our region, the Asia-Pacific region, I'd be saying, look at what social justice means. How can you make that central in your programming, in your training for new presenters as they come into the station? How can you ask them and get them to look at what they're doing through a social justice lens? So it's not just about entertaining by playing good songs. It's about choosing music which will pique people's interest. It's about making comments about how that music was influential perhaps somewhere else in leading to social change within that particular community. So I think that would be my central message back to my Australian colleagues in community radio broadcasting. Look beyond the entertainment factor to perhaps how social justice can be implemented within what you're doing on air at the moment.